everybody. Welcome into First Take. Max Kellerman, how are we doing?
Hey, Molly.
Stephen A. in NYC, good morning.
What's up, y'all? How y'all doing? Good morning.
Good. Good morning, Stephen A.
Fantastic. You guys ready to get into it?
Always.
All right. I'm ready.
All right.
Let's go.
Let's do it. So coming up, we'll debate if the Cowboys should trade Romo. We have a special premiere of a new DJ Steve Porter mashup. Please don't miss that. But up first, a very serious subject. Seattle area police released letters, emails, and a journal in which Giants kicker Josh Brown admitted to domestic violence. The documents were part of an investigation stemming from Brown's arrest in May of 2015 following an incident with his wife. Now, these are quotes by Josh Brown from released documents. I have physically, mentally, emotionally, and verbally been a repulsive man. I have abused my wife. I have controlled her by making her feel less human than me and manipulated her with money. I viewed myself as God, basically, and she was my slave. Here's Giants owner John Mara speaking on WFAN yesterday afternoon on this subject.
And we were obviously disturbed by it, but based on what we knew, and particularly based on this young man's attempt to try to rehabilitate himself, which I still believe he is trying to do, and he's made a good faith effort to do that as far as I know. We were comfortable with the decision to continue to employ him. I can't answer right now what the future holds for him. I think we need to gather some more information and then try to make as intelligent a decision as we can. He's admitted to us that he's abused his wife in the past, and I think what's a little unclear is the extent of that.
So Brown will not travel to London with the team for Sunday's game as originally reported against the Rams. The Giants said in a statement they will revisit the issue when they return. Earlier Thursday, the NFL said it would review the case and determine next steps in the context of the NFL personnel conduct policy. With that, Stephen A., what culpability do the Giants and the NFL have here?
Extreme culpability. The only thing that we can say in favor of them is not as extreme as Josh Brown, because he's the ultimate villain in all of this. He's admitted to physically, mentally, emotionally abusing a woman that he took a vow to spend the rest of his life with. I mean, how much worse can it get than that? And clearly he was a repeat violator in that regard, which is why they ended up in the divorce. So there's nothing to debate there. As it pertains to the New York Giants and the NFL, as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing to debate here either. If you are the New York Giants, somehow, some way, first of all, before I even say that there's no excuse for how they act, let me make sure that I qualify my comments by saying this, because it's very, very important to say. No matter who you are, no matter what position you hold, this kind of behavior can't be excused. It can't be condoned. It has to be condemned at every level, and that's the bottom line. But forgive me if it also resonates in my mind how all of these clear exceptions or clear modifications or leniency, rather, is being accorded to a 37-year-old kicker. Are you kidding me? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. We might not like it. We might not approve of it. But if it was a superstar player or what have you, is inexcusable as it would be, at least we could make rhyme or reason as to why it's taking place, no matter how egregious it may be. But in the case of Josh Brown, I'm at a loss for why the concessions have been made for this man. He should have been off the team as far as I'm concerned. If you're the New York Giants, who's supposed to be an organization that's class personified, who's supposed to be about doing everything on the up and up, the Maras and the Tishas and all of them, and a reputation that they have built spanning decades, to sit here and allow this particular individual over the last year to essentially stain this franchise makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. They should be condemned themselves. They should be called to the carpet. I can't believe the man went on radio in New York City and actually acknowledged that he was aware of a past involving domestic violence with Josh Brown. Don't tell me you weren't aware of this stuff when in fact you've acknowledged that you were aware to some degree of it. So there was no reason for the man to be suspended for just one game. It should have been more severe. And on behalf of the NFL, how in God's name do you come off of Ray Rice? Do you come off of Greg Hardy? Go to Josh Brown and think that one game is going to suffice. And then to sit up there and to tell us that a multi-billion-dollar establishment, okay, generating in excess of $18 billion plus a year, #1 sport in America, with goobs and gobs of money, which means influence, can't get their hands on information, finding out exactly what this dude, Josh Brown, exactly has done. And then not only that, there's a divorce file, Max and Molly, that was out there. Josh Brown told us months ago he was getting divorced from his wife. He told the media that. So you could have looked up the divorce papers. And then I'm going to go here, Max. Listen, I don't know Josh Brown from a can of paint. Nobody's excusing Ray Rice. We damn sure ain't excusing Greg Hardy. These are two individuals who committed egregious acts and needed to pay for them. Ray Rice has shown an incredible level of contrition compared to Greg Hardy, which is why a lot of us promote the idea of him getting a second chance. But the acts were committed. They deserved to be punished. Everybody acknowledges that with the brothers. But this white dude, Josh Brown, who is a kicker on the New York Giants, who literally taken a journal highlighting his transgressions, his egregious acts. And it's not until a couple of days ago when the Kings County office in Washington sits up there and releases this information that suddenly here we are again. This should have been handled by the New York Giants. It should have been handled by the NFL. It was egregious that they haven't handled this. It's egregious that they still haven't handled this. It's not enough for him not to be going to London. He should be suspended immediately for the max that is allowed under the collective bargaining agreement because of what Ray Rice has suffered, because of what Greg Hardy has suffered from. In the interest of fairness, this has to be handled. And the Giants and the NFL need to be called to the carpet for this. This is a damn shame.
I want to address the Ray Rice and Greg Hardy stuff in a minute, but I just first want to say that I believe today everyone, and yesterday, everyone is asking the same questions. Yeah. It's baffling. The reaction of the NFL and the Giants is baffling. I want to start actually with the NFL. And everyone's going to say this too, and you said it today, Stephen A. On the heels of Ray Rice, what happened to a zero-tolerance policy? It seems the opposite of that, and everyone's going to ask the same question. And for a 37-year-old kicker, and the reason people bring that up, it's not to say, well, if he was a star, it would be okay. It's to say, to on the one hand say you're focusing on this issue of domestic violence, which is, along with race and police brutality, particularly as it pertains to race, the two social issues of the day. It's one of the two major social issues of the day. And in the NFL, there was the issue of the anthem and the protests. But even simultaneous with that is the issue of domestic violence in the NFL, Greg Hardy and others. So it's baffling. People have, and I have questions about it. Why? It seems like such an easy thing to do. Zero tolerance, here's the suspension, as opposed to going light for this guy. And from the Giants' point of view, it's not their greatest, most shining moment. It also seems baffling. As a 37-year-old kicker, that is a proud family-owned organization. You never hear former players bad-mouthing them. They're considered to be run very well. I consider them to be a well-run organization that has higher principles even that they adhere to. Plexico Burress, they don't like what happens with him from a legal point of view. They will step in and say, no, he's not playing for us before even the league. You know, they do things in a way you would think they'd be the first ones to say, no, you can't do that. So I've been asking these questions. What happened to zero-tolerance policy? And here's what I came up with. At first, and then I got past even this. At first, I thought, well, maybe they saw the journals and the journal entries that Josh Brown made, and they read them as confessional, the way one would confess to a priest in private or to a shrink in therapy, and thought, well, look, here is a guy who is working on himself, who's owning up to his mistakes, and who's trying to be better. The problem is both the NFL, whether or not that passes muster in the first place, I'm going to get to that in a second, both the NFL and the Giants have said they didn't see the journal. So it couldn't have been that. Well, at least he's working on himself, and anyway, this should have been private and all that. It couldn't have been that if they didn't see it. So I'm left with the idea, Malcolm Gladwell wrote about this in Blink, that you know what's most highly correlated with lawsuits for malpractice with doctors, it's not actually their results. It's their bedside manner. Bedside manner, you could have bad results and good bedside manner and be sued less for malpractice than good results with a bad... Wait, I'm not done. Good results with a bad bedside manner. And I think that's how it applies to Josh Brown. I think that he, and you hear his teammates and everyone talking about him, they see him as a good guy. And they're not looking at the recidivism, the fact that the behavior was a pattern and continuing. But they see him as a good guy, and that bedside manner allowed a 37-year-old kicker to skate with these very serious charges and even confessions that he's made about domestic violence. By the way, the worst among the worst of them was the fact that he admitted to being physical with his ex-wife when she was between 4 and 6 months pregnant.
Sickening.
Well, here's the deal. The other part about it, and listen, when we bring up the dichotomy that exists between a Ray Rice and a Greg Hardy and how they were treated and a Josh Brown and how he's being treated, here's why I also brought up you got two brothers that have been raked through the coals, deservedly so, no doubt, but nevertheless raked through the coals, and Josh Brown has been protected. It's not about... You're not looking and walking around and seeing a white person here, a white person here, and thinking something like that. No, you're talking systemically. It harkens you back to the days with issues with black coaches and beyond, and the great Bill Walsh talking about how, you know, folks don't necessarily ingratiate themselves with us well enough, or vice versa, et cetera, et cetera. You're talking about relationships. And the fact of the matter is, some folks have better relationships than others. There is no doubt that Josh Brown clearly has a good relationship with Giants ownership. What other justification can there be? Even if you have relationships with players and they love you and they're your teammates. Steve Weatherford is a good guy. He's been on this show on many occasions. He's one of Josh Brown's best friends, former teammate. Spoke up for him just the other day. He's entitled to do that. What I'm saying is he ain't the decision maker. Those teammates of his ain't the decision makers. The coach is. The GM is, ownership is. And don't tell me that Jerry Reese or Ben McAdoo went to ownership on behalf of Josh Brown and say, it's imperative that we keep this 37-year-old kicker. Oh, hell no.
What I want to address
in my opinion, hold on, in my opinion, Mara going on New York radio and speaking about this speaks to his direct involvement with Josh Brown from a relationship perspective. And when you have that going on, that's where the dichotomy exists. That's where the problem takes place, because every player ain't fortunate enough to have those relationships. So if relationships are going to dictate ramifications, then there's going to always be folks on the losing end, and fairness is never going to be a part of the equation. And that is clearly not the case with Josh Brown, who should have his behind suspended now. I said it months ago when this stuff was revealed. He should have been suspended, and one game certainly wasn't enough. It's ridiculous.
I don't ever dismiss claims or at least thoughts about how race has an impact on these things, because clearly, given our history, of the history of this country, that is a reasonable question to ask, and it's likely that race often does play a factor. It's unknowable maybe how much of a factor. Certainly relationships play a factor, and maybe race plays into relationships. Although in Ray Rice's case, much like Josh Brown, who leads the prayer group and everything, Ray Rice was considered a good guy with good relationships. The difference in the Ray Rice case was video. The difference in the Greg Hardy case was lack of responsibility, the appearance that he wasn't taking responsibility for his behavior, owning up to it, and really looking to make changes, or even really acknowledging it. The Josh Brown, there's no video. There's a journal, but there's a difference. And there's a sense that he's owning his behavior, although I agree the behavior continues. So it doesn't really matter much what he says. It's what he does.
Let me tell you why, even though Ray Rice had the video and Greg Hardy showed minimal, if any, contrition at all, why this is so important, Max, why it doesn't matter. You know why it doesn't matter? Because that's the backdrop. Now, if Josh Brown happened beforehand, that's fine. But the fact that Ray Rice happened, the fact that Greg Hardy happened, the fact that the NFL was raked through the coals and had their reputation smeared because, the lack of due diligence they were accused of putting forth in Roger Goodell, all of a sudden we got articles in USA Today and beyond highlighting 50 different cases where Roger Goodell may have been able to be more active than he had actually been. The fact that the NFL had to implement policies, the fact that the NFL had to hire individuals that specialize in situations like this, all female, by the way. The fact that the NFL went through all of these things to address this specific issue, and then to turn around after all of that and still let a 37-year-old kicker off the hook. A 37-year-old kicker.
Well,
Molly, am I wrong here?
No, go ahead, Molly.
There's a couple things, and then I want Max to jump
sense?
back in because I was writing down a couple questions as you guys were talking, and these are a few that I have. One, during all this, why did they re-sign the man? That's my first question. During this, they re-signed him to a contract extension. What are you doing? Second question here. Where are the 4 women that were named to help the NFL in terms of the domestic violence policy? I want to hear from them because it appears that they botched this. And I could be wrong, and I'd love for them to speak out and explain it to me. Let me just 2 more things. Another thing, as far as the bedside manner you spoke to, Anita Marks talked about that with Michelle and Marcellus on Sports Nation yesterday. She covers the team, and she said it was exactly that. He was a great guy around the organization, so people didn't expect this kind of behavior and maybe didn't do their due diligence. And my last thing, Stephen A., to what you brought off, so there's these documents. Why can the NFL and the Giants not obtain these documents? So then I'm told they're in divorce papers. Please, yeah, I want you to. So they're in his divorce file. Did you ever think the man might have got divorced partially because of the fact related to these domestic violence issues? So there might be information there. And one last thing that I want to say, Ben McAdoo had said, we're not going to turn our back on him, and we're going to stick by Josh Brown. Great, but you turned your back on his family. And if you want this man, if you truly love this man, he needs to get healthy. He's sick. He can't worry about football. He needs to put 100% into these demons and deal with them.
In terms of why did they extend the contract? This is one of the worst components of domestic violence because the family is an economic unit, is part of a pull that keeps women in relationships that are bad for them. And so part of the issue, well, if he doesn't work, then how does he provide for his family, including his children, which are also his wife's children? That's part of the serious and tragic nature of domestic violence, I think. Stephen A.?
Well, listen, you're right, Max. Absolutely. But that's why the NFL and the Giants can't be excused. Because they knew all of this. One of the things, if you recall, with the whole Ray Rice scandal, one of the things that resonated was the fact that his then fiance, now wife, went before Roger Goodell and pled on behalf of her husband. Roger Goodell used that as justification for giving him the initial 2-game suspension because he had not seen the video from the situation in Atlantic City. So while Roger Goodell hired those 4 ladies in the NFL league office to assist in addressing these matters, was not just from an investigative perspective, but also from the perspective of the alleged victim. What has transpired? How do we deal with this? Because he was acknowledging as a league office, possibly even as a human being, that he was ill-equipped to deal with this himself. So with all of that as a backdrop and all the things that the NFL, the Shield, not to mention the individual teams under its purview and 1,000+ players under its purview that everybody had to be subjected to over the last year and a half or so because of Ray Rice and the Greg Hardy situation. A 37-year-old kicker named Josh Brown gets dealt with lightheartedly. It is as egregious as it gets. It speaks to, if not nepotism, favoritism, because it is clear that most other people would not get treated the way that Josh Brown has gotten treated, which leads us to ask the question, because we don't know, it leads us to ask the question, why? Why did this dude get that kind of leniency, not just from the Giants, Because even though it's inexcusable, we can understand it because clearly ownership likes him, if not loves him. But the NFL, why not? Why not?
I think, Molly, your question is the best one as it relates to this information. Because the issue in the Ray Rice case that came up as the facts were coming out was there didn't seem to be a good faith effort by the NFL to acquire the videotape. The video was available, and it didn't seem like they tried very hard to get it. And here it comes out that the NFL called the sheriff's department to get the journal, but they didn't identify themselves as the NFL. And once they were told no, they didn't try again, according to the sheriff's department. They're pointing at each other. The point is that also doesn't seem like a very good faith effort
no, you're not
to
doing your
do
job.
the investigation. Yes, Stephen.
Max, to buffer your point, let's recall that the same accusations were made about Ray Rice, that the NFL could have indeed got a hold of the video earlier than they did, even though to the fairness of the NFL, they categorically denied there was any truth to that. They didn't know. Remember that supposedly a UPS package was mailed to them. They said they never got it. Remember that whole story in regards to the Ray Rice video. So the same could be said. So in that regard, there may be a bit of consistency, albeit as as unforgivable as it may be. There's a level of consistency with that and Josh Brown. In the end, where the inconsistency comes into play is how Josh Brown has been dealt with so lightheartedly with the backdrop of Ray Rice and Greg Hardy. That's the key here. You have all of this as evidence. You have a recent history to fall back on and how much damage that had done to the NFL shield. And to still allow this to happen for this dude is inexplicable. Makes no sense whatsoever. None.
Yep. And I'm just extremely disappointed with both the Giants and the NFL, and we'd love to hear from them if we're missing any information on this subject.